Hi, I'm Brian Van from SportbikeTrackGear.com, and today we're going to do a video showing you how I changed the rear wheel on my 2008 Yamaha R6. The concept behind this is just to give you an overview of what it typically takes to change or service the rear wheel on your bike. Along the way, I'm going to throw in a couple of tips that make it easier to service the bike. The tools I'm going to use for this rear wheel change are going to be a 1/2-inch ratchet with the appropriate socket for the axle nut, and I'm going to use this wrench to help me tension the chain and really pull the rear axle against the adjuster blocks before I torque the rear axle nut. I'm not going to use a torque wrench. I'm a technician, 20 years experience, I've got a really good hand with torque, and I don't feel that I need the torque wrench. If you don't have that same level of confidence, right? Grab a torque wrench. The specs are readily available online, multiple resources, and utilize those, okay? Like I said, the idea here is just to give you a brief overview and teach you a couple little tricks that I've learned along the way. I already have a set of the Avon 3D Ultra Extreme track tires mounted up on a spare set of rims. I have that luxury, so we don't have to mount a tire and then install it on the bike, so this is going to be a pretty quick procedure. We're going to start off with the 1/2-inch ratchet and break the axle nut loose. This axle nut has had the washer welded to it. What I like to do is I thread it out part way, push with my thumb, kind of gets the axle sliding out of the wheel. Go ahead and set the nut on the ground, push it through the rest of the way. I like to put my foot under the tire and my hand under the rim. I'm going to go ahead and slide the axle out now. It comes right out. I let the rim and tires sit on the ground now. The chain on the left side of the bike needs to come off the sprocket so we can get the wheel out of the bike. I pull it from the bottom over to the side, and what I like to do is I like to hang it out of the way on the rear swing arm. Then I grab the assembly and slide it out like so. We're going to need to reuse the cush drive with the sprocket as well as this wheel spacer. Something I'd like to point out on this bike that's a little bit different. We have a little deal here that we've rigged up that makes this rear caliper captive. Makes it a little quicker to change the tires on the race bike. That's not always the case. Most oftentimes it's not. There is a groove here that the rear caliper hanger has to slide into. It's very important when you reinstall this that you get that rear caliper hanger in that groove properly, okay? I don't have to fuss with that on this bike. It's a slight advantage, but that's something that you really need to pay attention to, and we'll talk about what it takes to do that along the way. Let's go over and grab the other rim. We mounted this Avon on here yesterday. What I like to do after I mount the tires to hold the inner bearing race in place, just use some masking tape. Keeps it in place so that way there's never going to be an issue. You're not going to lose the part. Okay, out of this race wheel now, I'm going to go ahead and pull the cush drive out. What I've done here is I've siliconed the cush drive bumpers in place on that rim. I didn't do it on this stock rim because I really don't use this one very often. But I do have all of the cush drive bumpers ready to install. And this is another very important thing. When you are taking this apart, you need to make sure that these rubbers are in here and take a look at them. Make sure they're in good shape. These are all in great shape. If you see the rubbers fatigued, if it's starting to wear, smashing, get new ones. This is an important part of your drivetrain. Here is the cush drive with a sprocket on it, right? There's the inner bearing. Here is the wheel spacer. That all stays together. I'm going to go ahead and push this down into the rim. Make sure it's in there nice and flush. I'm going to roll the wheel over. And I'm going to pull the spacer from this rim and transfer that over. Slide it in to seal. This is a great opportunity too to look everything over. Look at the seals, look at the bearings, make sure everything looks good. Most street bikes, you're not going to be changing these tires every weekend like we typically do. So when you have the opportunity to look at these things, slow down, take your time, and make sure everything looks good. To reinstall, slide the rim in. Remember, I don't have to fuss with this caliper hanger. That's a big advantage. I'm going to roll this forward, like so. We need to get the chain back over the sprocket. Start to slide the wheel back in position. Now remember, most folks are going to have to deal with that caliper hanger. Every bike in itself is a little bit different. It's not really the end of the world, but what you're going to want to do if you don't have it captive like this is in this state right here, once I've got the chain over, you're going to want to go ahead, slide the caliper over the rear rotor so the pads are now over the rear rotor, the caliper's on there, and you want to get this thing lined up in that groove. It's very, very important that it's in the groove. Put your foot under the tire, support it like so, and you want to make sure that as you rise up, the caliper stays in there. Grab the axle with your left hand, get it started, push it through the wheel. Just before it gets to that caliper hanger, come over here, double check everything, make sure it's in the slot, line it up, push it through. Now if you want to come to the other side here real quick, Josh, something else that's pretty important is you need to make sure that the axle is engaged properly with the axle adjuster blocks. For this particular bike, we need to make sure that this flat lines up the flat on the axle adjuster block. Push it in so it's nice and flush. Make sure you have done that properly. Another tip is your axle. Lubricate the axle with basically some grease, especially if you don't take it out very often. It makes it come in and out of the bike easy, and if it's going to be in there for a long time, it'll act as anti-seize so you don't end up with a seized rear axle. I've seen that happen. It's a total train wreck. It's really hard to get out, so remember, put a little bit of lube on the axle. From here, what I like to do, I'm going to double check the caliper and the hanger. Make sure everything is in there exactly as it should be. Look at the spacer, it all looks nice. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put the axle nut on, finger tight, get it up against the adjuster block. I'm going to take this wrench right here, I'm going to wedge it in between the chain and that rear sprocket. I'm going to roll it back. What I like to do is just tap on the wheel a couple of times, hold it down. What we're doing is we're forcing the rear axle against the adjuster blocks. And that ensures that your chain alignment is exactly where it was previously. Double check your chain tension at this point. This is a brand new chain. I'm going to retension this to the track. I like to run my stuff a little bit to the loose side. We just installed this today. I'll check it after the first session at the track and subsequently throughout the day and adjust the tension accordingly. Make sure everything's tight from the chain adjusters to the axle. Re-inspect your caliper and make sure that it's in there. I'll safety wire this later on. That's not something that most would do with a street bike, but with a race bike, that is a good idea. Okay, everything's on, everything's torqued down. There's a couple of things that you're going to want to do, right? First thing is pump your rear brake up. You don't want to end up with no rear brake on the first ride. It's really important, and oftentimes when you're changing the rear wheel, the caliper pistons get pushed in just a little bit, so the brakes need to be pumped up before they're going to have any pressure. Take a look at everything, verify your torque, double check your chain tension, double check your chain alignment. Make sure before you ride the bike, everything's done just right. Hopefully this video helps you decide whether or not a rear wheel and tire change is a project you want to tackle on your own bike. I'm Brian Van, sportbiketrackgear.com.